Jim is an attorney who advises on criminal, animal, and environmental law. He is a co-founder of Lawyers for Animal Protection in Africa, and he works in the courts with policymakers and stakeholders to strengthen the legal protection of wildlife species and the habitats they live in. He's currently pursuing a PhD in criminal justice at John Jay College, CUNY, with research interests in environmental criminology. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Let me share my presentation. Great. Good. Now, it's a true pleasure to be amongst all of you all to talk about the status of ethical tourism in Africa. I'm close to this subject by mere fact that I've been working in the wildlife law sector for the last 10 or so years as a wildlife lawyer. I have worked with various nonprofits in various interventions that have helped enhance the welfare of wildlife across Africa. This is an embodiment of my sentiments and opinions on the reality of working in Africa to either A, create assets for tourism, or B, to safeguard wildlife assets as tourism, and products. And then lastly, connecting communities who are protecting wildlife to, access tourism revenue. So my view on this approaches this from different aspects, and I'm able to gel together the thoughts from stakeholders and I will say multiple NGOs working in this sector. So Africa, long known for its magnificent wildlife, is a spectacle to behold. Whichever country you choose, it will at least have one of the big five. If not, it will have one of the small five. Africa is still one of those countries that has one of the largest mass migrations of wildlife, which I truly regard to be the true embodiment of nature. If you ever see 1 million wildebeest, crossing the savannah, nothing like that to remind you how small you are. We don't have to go to space for us to see the magnificence of the planet, but I think being around these animals is truly iconic, and also acknowledging that most of these species are endangered. We are maybe truly the very last generations to see some of these species alive. And it begs a huge question as to how much we're willing to protect. Hence the whole industry, trying to keep these animals alive by creating an avenue where they can, be kept alive on show for the rest of the world to see, and obviously purely preserved for their nature. So any single time you see me throwing the words around ethics around animal tourism, please understand that my thought around ethics lies on the five freedoms that I believe this wildlife are owed by us, a duty we owe to this wildlife. We owe them a duty to not exploit them in a way that harms them, in a way that is cruel. They deserve space. We need to allow them the space to be able to exhibit their natural exhibits. If it's characteristics, if it's a migrating species, it is beholden in our law to create space for this, to accommodate this species, which we believe we share the planet with. And then, of course, I'll remiss if I don't mention one of the most magnificent wildlife migrations in Africa is in South Sudan, a country we have long known to be at war, but truly has one of the largest migrations of species, I think, on the planet, bigger than the one on the Masai Mara. It is truly, truly a jewel slept on. And I truly do believe that the only thing that has helped this species remain magnificent as they are is that everybody was busy fighting each other. They forgot to poach the animals. So even in the dark visages of Africa's wars, beautiful jewels and specters of nature can be seen. Um, and this magnificence, of course, is protected across 335 national parks across Africa, with over 1,000 game reserves, with over 500 plus wildlife sanctuaries. And then, of course, Africa has dedicated at least 15%, approximately 15% of its entire landmass to wildlife protection. It's still giving more. Newer and newer national parks are being set up. And this is very, very promising. It allows us to see that for once, we are taking land away from people and turning it into preservation for wildlife, truly creating more space for these species. And I think one of the most fascinating things I've seen, especially in Southern Africa, is they've started thinking about climate change and they started creating new corridors that allows species to start exploiting new land because we anticipate they're going to have a problem 50, 100 years down the line. This is magnificent and it's worth praise. So the scope of this review is simple. I will show you what shapes the Africa tourism landscape. And then, of course, I will talk about these four key pressure points. These four key pressure points are not exhaustive, but these I feel are the most important ones that we ought to think about. One, I want to talk about the impact of poaching onto wildlife tourism and how this is affecting, tourism across Africa. Two, the issue about regulated hunting and sport fishing, which have now picked up in Africa, and the ethics of it, and whether this has any reputational damage to tourism of some countries. And then, of course, stakeholder responsibilities. What are the responsibilities of the tourists themselves? Sometimes we over focus on the animals, that we forget that the humans themselves owe those animals duty. They we welcome you to our parks. We don't welcome you to compete with our animals in the parks. And then, of course, lastly, food travel and wild meat travel. Foodies have found West Africa to be an amazing place to go and indulge in exotic food. And this has created this whole travel around exotic meat, pretty much like how people travel to India or other countries for medical assistance. People are now traveling to countries in West Africa to try out these new foods. So it bears mentioning that this could be a problem if we see culinary tourism increasing. So the African tourism map, quickly, if I may, is I'm overgeneralizing, but this is how I see it. From Southern Africa, we have this insistence on ecotourism plus a hunting, perspective towards wildlife exploitation. Eastern Africa, by maybe Tanzania, most countries have adopted a purely ecotourism outlook, where hunting has largely been, prohibited or banned or really, really limited. And then, of course, West and Central Africa. Central Africa still remains a dark place when it comes to matters of policy. We still don't know much. Central African Republic, which has a lot of wildlife, is pretty much like a dark space. We know nothing about it. Congo, we're trying as much as we can to figure out how to legislate or do policies around even simple things like tourism. And then, of course, the other countries like Cameroon, I'll say Ghana, Nigeria, are quite developed, but they have quite developed. They have developed their bushmeat trade, their wild meat trade to a level where tourists are now flooding those countries just to experience wild meat. So to simplify things, I'll start here. One on ecotourism, which is a non-consumptive use of our wildlife, and then one, hunting, which most of us find to be problematic, but also countries in Southern Africa consider to be a valid way of making a living. So to begin with ecotourism, there's a $38.6 billion industry across Africa. The statistics go as far back as 2023. This figure has gone higher with over close to 70 million tourists. This is truly an industry that is mainstream and supporting at least the growth of at least maybe 23 African countries. Like I know for Kenya, where I come from, tourism is our second highest revenue earner. Without tourists coming to a country, we won't have enough money to buy oil. It's literally that simple. The connection can be drawn. As you can see, the tourism revenue took a hit in 2020, where tourists couldn't travel, obviously because of COVID. And this truly made us rethink our model of how are we running the wildlife-based tourism industry and how should it be run. For the very first time, we saw the number of like local indigenous tourists overtake that of, I will say, Europe, foreign tourists, which was fascinating because for the very first time we were able to connect our people to their wildlife resource, and it was fascinating to see. Then, of course, trophy hunting in itself is probably a $220 million industry. There are at least nine major countries out there that do hunting as a model. And then of course, they attract around 17,000 hunters annually who travel to Africa to shoot these animals that they consider to be iconic or unique or important for their hunting escapades. When we put these two side by side, to me, I think they don't even compare. Often people say this as a competition between two tourism models or two wildlife-based industry models. I think it's a rivalry with no competition, obviously. $38.6 billion compared to $220 million is literally nothing. And the ethics around hunting itself have brought a lot of problems in terms of conservation in Africa. For example, the insistence of Southern African countries to create a wildlife trophy industry has led to them for the last, maybe I will say, 6, 7, COPs, which are the Convention of Party meetings for CITES, the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species. They've been showing up with proposals every single time to allow them to sell their species and to allow them to engage in this trade. And over again, we've seen how every single time they're allowed to do this, they open up, a parallel illegal market or a pseudo market. And this type of modeling itself has impacts that go beyond just the borders of these 9 trophy hunting countries. So the ethics of this largely debated, but one day we hope that Africa will speak with one voice, hopefully moving forward. Then, of course, the way I see it, a poacher and a hunter, the only thing that separates them is a permit. The outcome for the species is the same, the species dies. Poachers and hunters to me are the same. I think a hunter is just a poacher with a permit. And for me, I think the mere fact what they do in our continent, the fact that poaching has impacted, wildlife species across the continent is of concern, obviously, to the tourism industry. And then, of course, illegal wildlife trade is now the third largest illegal trade after drugs and arms. And this is not the company you want to keep if you want to keep a species alive for the next generation. Then, of course, the debate between regulated and unregulated hunting has brought around many ethical concerns. Once the methods they used in illegal hunting are, very indiscriminate, very cruel. And then, of course, the risk of zoonotic diseases. We forget that 2020 was a result of, the consumption of wildlife meat, and we've pretty much done nothing about it. And then, of course, regulated hunting, say in South Africa in itself, is a massive, is creating opportunities for, reputational damage for their tourism industry, where, for example, their canned hunting industry around lions, and of course, once they're killed, the lion bone trade has created a lot of problems for the, South Africa tourism package. Tourists are now shunning South Africa because of its unethical tourism practices. And we are seeing that the continued perpetration of this, we will say, trades, and we will say cruel uses of animals and exploitation of animals is creating challenges for the more, I will say, ethical, forward-looking tourists. They are avoiding these countries. Then, of course, a key takeaway and outlook, like I can tell you, is that Africa still continues to protect this species. The connection between tourism revenue and conservation will be joined at the hip for as long as we continue having species on our continent. Ecotourism, growing as a mainstream industry, is important. Largely, hunting, growing as a niche, I will say package under African tourism will soon be contested. As you can see, it is declining in influence and in revenue. And then, of course, community models, connecting communities who live within and along these animals, um, creating a benefit for them that allows them to gain directly the tourism industry, makes them capable guardians of these animals. And then largely, sport fishing in Africa has picked up. Big problem for us. We don't have regulations in place for most of these countries. It's problematic. Food travel and wild meat moving to West and Central Africa. If you go on YouTube right now and look for exotic foods in West Africa, you will see thousands of YouTube influencers who have at least made a trip to West Africa to try some exotic species. There are challenges on how exotic of a species have you eaten. These are things that millions and millions of us are watching and consuming, and it's creating an entire industry that we truly believe is unethical. Then, of course, I'll remiss if I don't talk about the tour operators and their obligations, and I will say their ethics around, animal viewing. Our tourist operators, because obviously of their need to 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 please our tourists have had to bend their rules, and it has had horrible outcomes for species and wildlife. And it begs the question as to what point and how much compliance can we exert on this tourism or to tourist guides and tourist industry so that they know that they should be catering more to the animals and not to the tourists. But then again, the person who pays decides. We've seen this, of course, with IUCN and WWF arguing that this holding of, for example, of animals in captivity, these lion walks, these elephant rides, they lack any conservation benefit at all. They they are not helping those species decline. They are not helping them stop them from decline. The revenue from these lion walks or from these exhibits that we see are really not being brought back into conservation for any meaningful outcomes. And then, of course, if you've been to Marrakesh, you've been to Egypt, if you've been to Morocco, you've seen this, the monkeys trapped, all for you, all for the tourists. They are doing this to entertain you. This captive industry thrives because of tourists, and tourists are not challenging the morality and ethics of this. And we believe this is their duty. I've seen this in Kenya, for example. I'll play a video. It's maybe a bit distressing, but I would love for you to see this. On this is the Mara River, one of the banks of the Mara River, with thousands and thousands of wildebeests trying to cross, and tourists were just fighting just to get a shot, and they just stood in the way, just completely disrupting the movement of this species. Now, this is as unethical as unethical can be, and I can tell you as dangerous can be. Falling in that river, just full of, I would say, Nile crocodiles in itself is. This is just a lawyer's litigation nightmare. This is what I see in my nightmares, and you don't want to be here. And then, of course, we've seen a lot of tour operators violate laws around crowding animals. This, for example, is a caravan in the Masai Mara where hundreds of caravans rushed toward a lion scale, completely disrupting what was a very normal, I would say, wildlife interaction. And we can't keep thinking that this is okay, and this is completely unethical. And most of these tour operators are now brought to question. Then, of course, let me move to the next page. Then there's this. Of course, I took this photo because the overcrowding in itself. At some point, I want tourists to come into my country and love and get as close as they can to these animals. But also at the same time, I feel like we owe these animals, like there's some space we owe them. Most of the scientists are arguing that we have habituated this species because of how close we are getting to them. And I feel the science is not talking to the policy or to the practice. As a result, the reality will continue to be this. So the key tensions are simple: conservation revenue over community sovereignty over some of these tourism assets needs to be ironed out. Photographic ecotourism over regulated hunting is a conversation that needs some form of finality. We can't do ecotourism everywhere, and it seems that we can't keep doing hunting anymore. So what works? We need to move beyond this. We need to move beyond the same package. We are being dishonest to tourism by selling them the same package across Africa. We need to diversify in non-consumptive ways. Cultural food practices via wildlife protection. This, of course, having blanket bushmeat bans creates complex problems for communities that already have this food ingrained in their cultural use. But then, of course, we also need to limit just the explosion of demand for this wild meat across, social media and across, I would say, culinary economy. And then, of course, whose ethics are we applying? Is this Western ethical standards? Are we anthropomorphizing like animals? Are we saying that, hey, I feel you're too close to that animal, when in reality, scientists are telling us there's nothing wrong with you being close to that animal? Whose ethics are we doing? And then, of course, at the end of the day, Southern African countries usually tell us you have no right to talk to us about your ethics in our country. So African policy autonomy is also now something that needs to be challenged and looked into. Then, of course, where do we go from here? We truly have to ask ourselves these questions: that one, Africa is not one continent. It's just one continent with 54 countries, 54 ways of thinking, 54 ways of handling issues. We need to look into issues of investing in non-consumptive infrastructure where viable, creating new packages beyond the obvious ecotourism one. And then, of course, we need to engage largely with these communities who we do believe if they benefit from tourism revenue, they can be better guardians of wildlife. And then, of course, they'll take care of wildlife better. Animal welfare will be enhanced and improve over time. And then, of course, our policy should mirror science. If scientists are saying we can only have 1 million tourists visiting this park, the government should limit itself to 1 million. You shouldn't be chasing the revenue for them to increase their quotas. If you can't fish more than 1,000 individuals of kingfisher off our coast, there should be regulations around that. Then, of course, cultural respect, acknowledging that these communities, the way they see animals is completely different from way tourists from foreign countries see these animals. These animals are ingrained in their communities as gods, as totems, as part of their heritage. The way these communities view animals is not the way most Europeans view their animals. So figuring out how we live in an area of mutual respect can completely define responsible tourism outlooks. Thank you so much for having me. That's how you reach out to me. That's how you reach to me, my email, and then of course my handle for Twitter and anywhere else. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was phenomenal. And I know that we asked quite a lot of you to address um, all of a continent and thinking about how tourism plays out across that continent and all of the issues. I think you really did a great job highlighting all of the issues and the things that we need to be thinking about in this conversation. So
Thank
while
you.
while folks are thinking about questions that they might want to ask you, I want to see if there's something, because we did ask so much of you, if there's something that you had to go through too quickly that you wanted to say a little bit more about, and then we'll start with questions.
Yeah, I think there seems to be this big question of whose ethics are we applying? And when you talk about ethical tourism, what are we actually talking about? Are we talking about industry practices? Are we talking about outcomes? I mean, the question of whose ethics are you applying is very contentious. There are countries who believe that this species, their property, and they can do whatever they want. If they want to bring in 1,000 hunters to come and shoot them, you don't have a right to say so. And this is crazy because like in Kenya, for example, we have the super tuskers, this big, big elephants, old elephants, iconic elephants, but they cross into Tanzania, which has hunting quotas. Those elephants are crossing into the same hunting blocks where they'll be shot by the same hunters. So hunters will rather wait for the same tusker across Tanzania as opposed to coming to Kenya and try and do it illegally because it's prohibited in our country. So my greatest frustration has always been that the ethics of the tourism industry are largely guided by the underlying conservation philosophy of that country. So if that country decides they don't care about wildlife, you have no chance. The tourist will come and they'll have free reign. And then lastly, if any of you have ever watched Westworld, there's this dystopian series of where people can go into this virtual world where they can do anything they want and get away with it. Tourists come to Africa because most of them, okay, some of them, let me not overgeneralize. Some of them, they know they can come to Africa and get away with a lot. That's why we end up with situations like Cecil the Lion being killed, Jody being killed, and these people completely avoiding any form of justice in Africa. They were only able to get justice in the countries they were in. But if the underlying philosophy of the country does not marry with your ethics on how animals should be protected, then obviously tourists will target that country to misbehave. Those two things go hand in hand. So underlying conservation philosophy has to marry with the tourism philosophy. Otherwise, you will attract the bad kind of tourists. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So you're raising that we have the difference in ethical, when we talk about ethical tourism, the ethics of the jurisdiction and the ethics of the tourists who might be coming from a different jurisdiction, and sort of finding some way to attach ethics to the animals in question, right? So
Mhm,
that when they travel, the ethical protection follows
mhm.
them would be, yeah, phenomenal. Carol, I know that you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Jim. Amazing talk. Um, I wanted to thank you for addressing the food element of the tourist experience. Tourists spend 20 to 30% of the entire trip. We're talking about leisure tourists here, not business, but 20 to 30% on the food that they eat. And it's something I'm deeply interested in. Sometimes when we talk to people about animals and tourism, they think about wildlife tourism or, animals and zoo, where food is really a central element to the experience. Um, I know there are organizations across the continent that are working in farmed animal welfare. The Animal and Vegan Advocacy Summit is happening in Ghana. My question, all that was set up to my question, who is working on the bushmeat issue relative to tourists?
It's a good question. Again, I just to echo what you're saying, most people who travel across the world, they always have like a food, I would say food tour element to everything. I do the same thing too. Like it will be impossible for you to go like to New Orleans and not go and try the food, or not go to like Korea and not try the food. So it's connected. One of my biggest problems is NGOs who are working in this area are not working in demand reduction, which I feel is where everybody needs to be. They're probably working in like, how do we stop the bushmeat from reaching the market? And in reality, it's triage. I think it's enforcement triage. Like you're busy just trying to like, put band-aids over bullet wounds. If you're just trying to stop the bushmeat from entering the market, yeah, you're doing something noble, but there needs to be someone who works on the demand side. I haven't found as many organizations who work there that it is advocacy heavy. The ones that do either do like a very short, I will say campaign, it will be let's save the pangolins, and then they will do like a 1 month thing and then get out. I haven't seen anybody consistently do this, and just because I haven't seen doesn't mean no one exists. So I bet there could be someone out there. Maybe I just haven't heard of them. Yeah.
Thank
But the
you.
demand reduction is super important. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Kathy, you're muted if you're.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks, Kathy. Just a quick question. Jim, really enjoyed your presentation. Lots of great facts and the diversity of ideas and issues is staggering, when you look at the continent for sure. This is a real specific question. I just wanted to get a sense of the evolution of the canned hunting industry there, just to see, I've caught up with it every now and again over the years, but I know it's catering to a certain, I love the stats on the difference between ecotourism and the more consumptive forms of tourism. I just wanted to get a sense if there's been any new developments or changes, either from a policy or operational standpoint when it comes to the canned hunting issue there.
Yeah, brilliant question, David. And then, of course, I'm paying homage and true respect to the work you've done in this area. I don't know whether I'm about to tell you anything you don't already know, but I'm gonna give it a try. So the evolution of the lion canned industry has been, I will say, over the years, it has gotten more cruel and it has started also embedding itself in other practices. Previously, it used to be, we're keeping this lion in a cage. Once it's of age, we're going to shoot it. Now, they started doing all this other cute stuff. They started doing this cub petting projects or cub petting sideshows where you can come and pet these cubs when they're kids. They found a way to monetize the true lifespan of this lion. So the lion is born today, you can start petting it. Now, once it gets bigger enough, you can, domesticate it enough for you to do the lion walks, which are very huge on Instagram nowadays. People walking around with 3 lions. Then, of course, once it's of age, they now transfer it to the canned hunting thing. So they have completely and fully, I will say, monetized the lifespan of the lion. But then it gets worse, David. I mean, of course, once they shoot the lion has been shot, the hunter is happy, takes his trophy, or sometimes often the head or a piece of the ear or the tail, mostly like the tail, I don't know why. Um, the lion bones themselves now go to the other lion bone industry. And then, of course, the lion bone industry now feeds into a very niche Chinese market, which is looking into lion bones. So I can say having a lion on your land is pretty much the most lucrative things you can do there. So now something else happened. I think 2019, NGO in South Africa obviously found this to be horrible. There were quotas being set up by the South African government on just how many lions can be in this industry. And then, of course, the civil society organizations were arguing and saying, wait a minute, this industry is so anti-animal welfare. Its welfare standards are so non-existent that this entire industry in itself just shouldn't exist. The quotas themselves should not only just be zero rated, they just shouldn't exist. And the courts for the very first time were super, super, super audacious in saying, hey, the lion bone industry raises serious animal welfare concerns. And this is affecting the constitutional right of South Africans to enjoy their right to a clean and healthy environment, which is fascinating. Now, this right is improving all over Africa. At least I will say 20 constitutions in Africa have this right. Like every human has a right to a clean and healthy environment. And this definition of the word environment has animal welfare in it. So I can't say I'm living in a good environment if lions are being abused right next to me. So this opens this precedent has opened an amazing channel for us all over Africa. As lawyers, we are excited because of this ruling. Obviously, it's not binding across other countries, but it is very persuasive to our judges by saying them, hey, your sister in South Africa has said animal welfare connected to my right to a clean environment, which is an allegory of our constitution and which comes from the African Human Rights Charter. Well, Africa is pretty developed when it comes to this right. So the evolution has not only been noticed in terms of how exploitative and cruel the industry has been, but now safeguards have started emerging in this amazing precedent from the courts, amazing ruling and decree from the South African government not to engage in that trade for now. And then, of course, the collapse of the formal lion-born industry. Everything has gone under, but that's another problem. That's a downstream problem at the moment. But now I'm excited about this at the moment. Brilliant question, David. Brilliant question. Thank you for it.
Oh, brilliant answer. I really appreciate that. There's a lot of context. I had no idea. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Sure, you had to see it in a landscape view. Sometimes you may jump into the lion bone ruling and not miss how far the South African civil society agencies and, of course, their lion species have come from. It's a 3-decade fight. They're still not winning, but 3 decades of fighting.
Thank you. That was phenomenal. Ethne has a question.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say that was a beautiful presentation, and I can tell it was really well thought out, and that you care a lot about the topic. This is kind of more like a question for you personally. How did you get into law, and coming from where you come from, and what have been some of the most like greatest, I think, accomplishments or times where you felt like and you were doing well in your field, or you were making change?
Yeah, that's a big question. You put in a superlative in there, greatest. This is why no one can agree who's greater. Is it LeBron or Michael Jordan? Because of the superlative. When you use the word greatest, A-test, it destroys someone's way of thinking. So let me go to the most recent thing that I've been involved in that I thought was impactful and significant for animals. Wildlife species, very endangered wildlife species, our super tuskers were crossing from Kenya into Tanzania. And then, of course, Tanzania said that, hey, we will start giving our hunters quotas to shoot these elephants right about the time when these elephants cross over into Tanzania to breed. They know those big bulls just can't help them. They'll cross over into Tanzania, to breed. They know this, and they set the quotas around this time. So we threatened to sue them. We were ready to go to court. We wanted to go to the East Africa Court of Justice. And we wanted to sue them and tell them, hey, you just can't do this. We don't shoot our elephants, but you shoot them. Then, of course, they went back on their moratorium and they reversed their decision to do so. And our threat ended up being a win, and we were so excited by that. And that's what threatening people to sue them can do. And that's the beauty of the increasing rule of law in my country can do. And of course, across Africa, judges are becoming more audacious, courts are becoming more independent, and the law is kind of off-ish working. It works when it needs to. And this is why I think the promise of being a lawyer in this field came in. I used to be, Kathy was one of my initial day one law professors at Lewis and Clark when I showed up and I was like, so what's this animal law thing? I didn't know what it was. I just came from doing criminal law and a little bit of corporate law in Kenya. And I think mine was just pure curiosity. Like I wanted to be useful. I felt being a lawyer is kind of like having this incredible superpower, like, and I wanted to use it for good. And I felt challenging myself to do the animal law course was powerful. It expanded my way of thinking. I hung around planet-sized brained people like Kathy and her team, and they were very, I would say instrumental in helping me figure out how to package these issues in Africa. Because Africa is a different beast. So being a lawyer in Africa in itself was completely different. So I know you were hoping for an inspirational answer, but I was an accidental lawyer who ended up in a period in a industry he really liked, and obviously practicing at a time, at a beautiful time where rule of law is picking up, and where we can genuinely do cool things for animals through the courts. So I want to say I'm lucky. That's what I want to say. Yeah. And thank you for that question, Anthony. It was a
Thank
big
you.
question. Thank you for it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great answer, and I think it's even better that you weren't initially in that field, and it just shows that you you were speaking to something bigger, and you were just following what you felt was right. So I'm glad that you found something that you enjoy.
Yep. Yep. I dare you to take a flight to go and work with like some community who are setting up like a reserve or a sanctuary,
Hmm.
like in Congo, and you see them, they have nothing, they have no money, but all they have is promise and hope for
Hmm.
their kids. And you live with them and they share the only food they have with you. And you just, it fills you with, you can't learn this in school, you can't be paid in money. There are things you just can't be paid in. And you live there completely changed as a person. And then, of course, you are always doing very cool things. I feel like being an animal lawyer, I end up being in some of the most beautiful places. Like I usually argue, I'm always in Jurassic Park. So hey, um, it's beautiful working for animals, I guess. Yeah, it is.
Well,
I
thank you for
agree.
that. It was a great question and a wonderful answer. And I think it's a wonderful segue to our next component, because part of the goal of the Animals in Tourism Network is to bring together people who work in different fields so that we can benefit from learning from one another, and the sum is greater than the individuals, right? And Jim, I think you're a wonderful example of that, right? The work that you've done and then sharing your knowledge as you've done here and as you do elsewhere benefits all of us. So what I'm going to do is turn it over now to Bernie, who's going to lead this conversation about sort of where we're going from here with the work that we're doing in the Animal Tourism Network. Thanks, Bernie, and thanks, Jim, again.